"What the hell are you doing here? I removed your name from the guest list yesterday," said my daughter's groom at the wedding I had paid for entirely. I simply smiled. "I'm leaving now, but before that, you should meet 3 women." The scumbag fainted when he saw them. "I'm glad to have you here, have you? Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Walter, and I'm 58 years old. 2 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest father in the world because my daughter Amelia was getting married to what seemed like the perfect man. Today, standing in front of this church that cost me everything, I realize how wrong I was. The morning started like any other wedding day should. I woke up at 5:30, showered, and put on the navy suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. It wasn't expensive, but it was new, and that mattered to me. I wanted to look dignified for my little girl's big day, the same little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who made me breakfast on Father's Day with burnt toast and too much syrup. I drove to the church 40 minutes early because I wanted everything to be perfect. Every detail of this wedding had consumed the last 2 years of my life. After Martha died 3 years ago, Amelia became my whole world. When she announced her engagement to Carl, I knew I had to give her the wedding her mother would have wanted. The flowers alone cost me $4,000. White roses, just like Martha had at our wedding 28 years ago. I remember standing in that florist shop, looking at the price list, feeling my chest tighten. $4,000 was more than I made in a month at the hardware store. But Amelia's eyes lit up when she saw those roses, and I couldn't say no. The venue was another $15,000. A historic mansion with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Amelia walked through it like she was in a fairy tale, spinning around in the ballroom, laughing in a way I hadn't heard since her mother passed. That laugh was worth every overtime hour I worked. Every weekend I spent painting houses on the side to make extra money. Then there was the dress. $8,000 for a piece of silk and lace that she'd wear for one day. When the seamstress called to schedule the final fitting, I had to ask my supervisor for an advance on my paycheck. The embarrassment burned, but I swallowed it down. This was for Amelia. The catering, the band, the photographer, the cake, the invitations printed on expensive paper that felt like velvet between my fingers. Each expense chipped away at my savings, then my retirement fund, then forced me to take out loans I wasn't sure I could repay. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd picture Martha watching from wherever she was, smiling because our daughter was happy. I sold my truck and bought a used sedan that barely ran. I canceled my cable, stopped eating lunch at work, bought generic groceries, and wore the same 3 shirts in rotation. My back ached from all the extra work, painting houses until midnight, then getting up at 6 for my regular job. But it was temporary. After the wedding, I could get back on my feet. Standing in front of the church this morning, I felt proud. The white ribbon on the doors, the flower arrangements flanking the entrance, the elegant programs stacked neatly on the table, everything looked exactly like the magazine photos Amelia had shown me. I'd done it. I'd given my daughter the perfect wedding. That's when I saw Carl walking toward me, straightening his tie with that smug expression I'd learned to tolerate over the past year. He looked expensive in his tailored tuxedo, every detail perfect, just like always. His family had money, real money. But somehow I was the one who'd paid for everything. "Walter," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made my stomach drop, but I forced a smile. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" He glanced around, making sure no one could hear us, then looked back at me with those cold blue eyes. "There's been a change of plans. You're not walking Amelia down the aisle." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, my hand reaching for the church door to steady myself. "What do you mean? I'm her father." Carl shrugged, adjusting his cufflinks like we were discussing the weather. "My father flew in from Boston this morning. He's going to do it. It'll look better for the photos." "Look better?" My voice cracked, despite my efforts to stay calm. "I paid for this entire wedding, Carl. Every flower, every meal, every single detail." He tilted his head, studying me like I was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "And we appreciate that, we really do. But this is about what's best for everyone." The church bells started ringing, signaling that guests were arriving. I could see cars pulling into the parking lot, people I'd invited, people I'd worked extra shifts to afford dinner for. My hands were shaking. "Carl, please. She's my only child. Her mother isn't here to see this. Walking her down that aisle is all I have left." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. I thought maybe I'd reached him. Maybe he remembered that I was the man who'd welcomed him into our family, who'd trusted him with my daughter's happiness. Instead, he smiled that practiced smile he used when he wanted something. "Walter, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've done your part. Now it's time to step back and let the real family handle things." The real family. Those words echoed in my head as I watched him walk back toward the church entrance. I stood there for several minutes, watching guests arrive, watching Carl greet them with that charming smile, watching my daughter's perfect day unfold without me in it. I thought about Martha, about how she'd held Amelia in the hospital the day she was born, whispering promises about all the wonderful things we'd see her do. I thought about dance recitals and soccer games, about helping with homework at the kitchen table, about teaching her to drive in the empty mall parking lot. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made in the last 2 years, every ache in my back from extra work, every meal I'd skipped to save money, every night I'd lain awake worried about paying the bills, and then I thought about something else. Something I'd discovered 3 weeks ago that changed everything I thought I knew about the man my daughter was marrying. As I walked back toward my car, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I'd memorized but never wanted to see again. The message was simple. "Are you ready?" I looked back at the church one more time, at the wedding I'd sacrificed everything to create, at the happiness I'd built for a daughter who didn't even know her father had been cast aside. I typed back a single word. Yes. Because sometimes, when you've lost everything else, the truth is all you have left. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was sitting at my kitchen table with Carl, going over the final head count for the reception. Amelia was upstairs getting ready for her bachelorette party, and I was grateful for the chance to talk to my future son-in-law without her hovering over every detail. Carl had his phone out, scrolling through what he said were vendor contacts. He seemed distracted, checking messages every few minutes with that secretive smile I'd started noticing more often. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my handwritten list of guests and table arrangements. "So the final count is 147, I said, adding up the numbers for the 3rd time. "The caterer needs to know by tomorrow morning." Carl mumbled, still staring at his phone screen. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, typing something that made him chuckle under his breath. I felt a flicker of irritation. This wedding was costing me everything I had, and he couldn't even focus on the conversation for 10 minutes. But I swallowed the feeling down, reminding myself that he was probably just stressed about the big day. "Carl," I said a little louder. "The caterer?" "Right, yeah, sounds good," he replied without looking up. That's when his phone started buzzing with an incoming call. The name on the screen made my blood freeze. Jessica M. Carl's face went pale as he quickly declined the call, but it was too late. I'd seen it. The heart emoji after a woman's name that wasn't my daughter's. He glanced at me nervously, probably trying to gauge if I'd noticed anything. "Work call," he said quickly, slipping the phone into his pocket. "You know how it is." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. There could be an innocent explanation. Jessica could be a coworker, a client, a family friend. The heart emoji might not mean anything. But something in Carl's panicked expression told me otherwise. The phone buzzed again, this time with text notifications. Carl pulled it out to silence it, but in his nervousness, he fumbled with the screen. For just a second, I saw the preview of a message. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Same hotel." My stomach dropped. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I felt like I was falling through the floor. Carl managed to silence his phone and shoved it back into his pocket, avoiding my eyes. "Like I said, work stuff," he muttered, but his voice cracked slightly. Amelia's footsteps thundered down the stairs, her excitement filling the room as she bounced into the kitchen wearing a sash that read, "Bride-to-be." "Dad, doesn't Carl look nervous?" She laughed, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I keep telling him there's nothing to worry about. We're going to have the most perfect wedding ever." Carl's smile looked forced as he patted her hands. "Just want everything to be perfect for you, babe." I watched them together, seeing my daughter's genuine joy and Carl's obvious discomfort, and felt sick to my stomach. Amelia trusted him completely. She'd been planning this wedding for 2 years, talking about their future, about the children they'd have, about growing old together. After they left for the bachelorette party, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the guest list spreadsheet on my laptop. Every name on that list represented money I'd spent, sacrifices I'd made, dreams I'd invested in my daughter's happiness. And now I was wondering if it was all built on a lie. I told myself I was overreacting. One suspicious text message wasn't proof of anything. But I couldn't shake the image of that heart emoji, or the panic in Carl's eyes when he saw me looking at his phone. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. The way Carl always kept his phone face down when we were together, how he'd step outside to take certain calls, the nights he claimed to be working late when Amelia was at her book club. A week later, I was at the hardware store when I saw Carl's car parked outside Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant across the street. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, an odd time for a business lunch. Something made me walk over to the window and look inside. Carl was sitting in a corner booth with a woman I'd never seen before. She was blonde, probably in her 30s, and they were leaning across the table toward each other in a way that was unmistakably intimate. She was laughing at something he was saying, and he was looking at her the way he used to look at Amelia when they first started dating. I stood there for several minutes, watching them share dessert from the same plate, watching him reach across to touch her hand, watching her lean in to whisper something in his ear that made him grin. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. When I got home that night, Amelia was at my kitchen table with fabric samples spread everywhere, debating between ivory and champagne for the table runners. "Dad, you look tired," she said, glancing up from her samples. "You've been working too hard lately." I wanted to tell her what I'd seen. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake her, and make her understand that the man she was going to marry in 2 weeks was betraying her. But looking at her face, seeing how excited she was about table runners and centerpieces and all the tiny details that made up her perfect day, I couldn't find the words. "Just want everything to be perfect for you, sweetheart," I said instead, the same words Carl had used. She smiled, that radiant smile that reminded me so much of her mother. "It will be perfect, Dad, thanks to you. I know how much you've sacrificed for this wedding, and it means everything to me." That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Martha. What would she do if she were here? What would she want me to do? Protect our daughter's happiness even if it meant protecting a lie? Or tell her the truth and watch her world crumble? The next morning, I made a decision. I drove to a private investigator's office downtown, a small place above a dry cleaner that looked like it had seen better days. The investigator, a woman named Linda Chen, listened to my story without judgment. "I need to know if my daughter's fiancé is cheating on her," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I need proof, real proof, not just suspicions." Linda quoted me a price that made me wince. It was money I didn't have, money I'd planned to use for the final wedding expenses. But I wrote her a check anyway, using funds from the emergency account I'd hoped never to touch. "Give me 2 weeks," she said. "If he's hiding something, I'll find it." As I walked back to my car, I realized I was shaking, not from fear, but from something else. For the first time in 2 years, since I'd started sacrificing everything for this wedding, I was taking action instead of just paying bills and keeping quiet. I didn't know what Linda would find, but I knew one thing for certain. If Carl was betraying my daughter, if he was planning to build their marriage on lies and deception, I wasn't going to let that happen. Even if it meant destroying the perfect wedding I'd bankrupted myself to create. Even if it meant breaking my daughter's heart to save her from something worse. Linda Chen called me on a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after I'd hired her. I was at the hardware store, restocking paint cans, when my phone buzzed. My hands were shaking as I answered. "Walter, we need to meet today." Her voice was professional, but strained, and I knew immediately that she'd found something I didn't want to hear. We arranged to meet at a diner on the other side of town, somewhere I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. Linda was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a manila envelope thick enough to contain my worst fears. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of sympathy and disgust. "Sit down, Walter. You're going to need to." I slid into the booth across from her, my stomach already twisting into knots. She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs, placing them face down on the table between us. "I'll give it to you straight," she said. "Your daughter's fiancé is involved with 3 different women, not just one. 3. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected 1 affair, maybe 2 at most. But 3? I felt dizzy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Linda flipped over the first photograph. It showed Carl entering a hotel with the blonde woman I'd seen at Romano's. The timestamp showed it was taken just 5 days ago, during what he'd told Amelia was a business trip to Dallas. "This is Jessica Morrison," Linda explained. "Real estate agent, divorced, 2 kids. They've been meeting at the Marriott downtown twice a week for the past 4 months. She flipped over the second photo. Carl with a different woman, this one brunette, younger, walking hand in hand through a park I recognized as being about 20 minutes from Amelia's apartment. Rachel Santos, 26, works at a marketing firm. This has been going on for about 6 months. He told her he was single, by the way. She has no idea about the wedding." My mouth went dry. I reached for my coffee with trembling hands, trying to process what I was hearing. 6 months. He'd been planning a future with my daughter while actively pursuing other women. The third photograph made me physically sick. Carl kissing a redhead outside what looked like an expensive restaurant. But it wasn't just any redhead. It was someone I recognized. "That's Sarah Mitchell," I said quietly. "She works at the bank where I got the loan for the wedding." Linda nodded grimly. "I thought you might know her. They've been involved for almost 8 months. She's the one who helped process your loan application, isn't she?" The irony was devastating. While I was borrowing money to pay for Carl's wedding to my daughter, he was sleeping with the woman who approved the loan. Sarah had even commented on what a lucky bride Amelia was, how romantic it was that her father was willing to sacrifice so much for her happiness. Linda continued pulling items from the envelope. Text message printouts, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, phone records showing hundreds of calls and messages to numbers that weren't Amelia's. "The pattern is consistent," she explained. "He tells each woman what she wants to hear. Jessica thinks he's going to leave his fiancée after the wedding is called off. Rachel believes he's single and available. Sarah thinks she's in a serious relationship that's heading toward marriage." I stared at the evidence spread across the table, feeling like I was looking at the wreckage of my daughter's future. All those nights I'd worked late to pay for flowers and decorations, all those meals I'd skipped to save money for her perfect day, all those sacrifices I'd made because I believed she'd found someone who would love her the way she deserved. "There's more," Linda said, pulling out a small digital recorder. "I managed to get close enough to record part of a conversation between Carl and Jessica last Tuesday." She pressed play, and Carl's voice filled the space between us, clear and unmistakable. "The wedding is just a formality, Jess. Her dad's paying for everything, so why not let the old man have his fantasy? After the honeymoon, I'll file for divorce, split the assets, and then we can be together properly." I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling over. He wasn't just cheating on Amelia. He was planning to use her, to let her father bankrupt himself for a marriage that would last maybe 6 months. "How long have you known about the divorce plan?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Based on the messages I intercepted, he's been talking about it for at least 2 months. He's already consulted with a lawyer about asset division in Texas." Linda pulled out one final document, a legal consultation summary she'd somehow obtained. Carl had been planning his exit strategy before I'd even finished paying for the engagement ring. I sat there in that diner booth, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. Every sacrifice I'd made, every extra hour I'd worked, every dollar I'd scraped together, it was all to fund a lie. But underneath the devastation, something else was growing. Anger, pure, cold anger that started in my chest and spread through my entire body like fire. "What are you going to do?" Linda asked quietly. I looked at the photographs again, at the evidence of Carl's calculating cruelty, at the proof that he'd been planning to destroy my daughter's life while I paid for the privilege. "I'm going to stop him," I said finally. "But I need your help." Linda leaned forward. "What did you have in mind?" Over the next hour, we developed a plan. It was risky, and it would require perfect timing, but it was the only way to protect Amelia without her hating me for the rest of her life. "The wedding is in 3 days," I said. "Can you contact these women and arrange for them to be there? All 3 of them? All 3. They deserve to know the truth as much as Amelia does." Linda studied me carefully. "This is going to be messy, Walter. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my daughter, about the way she lit up when she talked about her future with Carl, about the trust in her eyes when she looked at him. Then I thought about Martha, about what she would want me to do to protect our child. "He took my money, my savings, my future," I said quietly. "But more than that, he was planning to take my daughter's happiness and throw it away like garbage. Yes, I'm prepared for messy." That night I sat in my empty house, surrounded by wedding gifts that hadn't been opened yet, looking at thank you cards Amelia had already written to guests for their generosity. The irony was suffocating. I called Linda one more time before bed. "Are you sure they'll come?" I asked. "Jessica is furious that she's been lied to. Rachel is heartbroken but wants answers. Sarah feels guilty about her role in all this and wants to make it right. Yes, Walter, they'll come." "And they understand what I'm asking them to do?" "They understand that you're trying to save your daughter from marrying a man who's planning to destroy her life. They understand that sometimes the truth hurts, but lies hurt more." After I hung up, I walked through my house one more time. The wedding dress was hanging in Amelia's old bedroom, covered in plastic, waiting for Saturday morning. The wedding favors were stacked in boxes in my dining room. The final payment receipts were spread across my kitchen table, proof of every cent I'd spent on what I'd thought was my daughter's happiness. In less than 72 hours, I would either save my daughter's future or lose her forever. But for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't just paying for someone else's dream. I was fighting for what was right. After Carl told me I wouldn't be walking Amelia down the aisle, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching guests arrive at the church I'd paid to reserve. The anger was building inside me like pressure in a steam engine, but I forced myself to stay calm. Everything depended on perfect timing. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "All three are here, waiting in the parking lot across the street as planned." I looked across the street and saw Linda's silver Honda, with 3 women sitting inside. Jessica, the blonde real estate agent who thought Carl was leaving Amelia for her. Rachel, the young brunette who believed Carl was single. And Sarah, the bank employee who'd helped me get the loan to pay for the wedding she was helping to destroy. They'd all agreed to this because Linda had shown them the evidence. They'd seen the same photographs I had, heard the same recorded conversations, understood that they were all being used by the same man. But seeing them sitting there, knowing what was about to happen, made my chest tight with anxiety. Another text came through, this one from Amelia. "Dad, where are you? The ceremony starts in 30 minutes and I need you to see my dress." My hand shook as I typed back, "On my way, sweetheart." I walked back toward the church, past the white ribbon and flowers I'd paid for, past the elegant programs with Carl and Amelia's names printed in gold script. Guests were filing in, chatting excitedly about the beautiful venue and the perfect weather. Nobody knew that the groom was a fraud who'd been planning his escape from the marriage before the wedding was even over. I found Amelia in the bridal room, surrounded by her bridesmaids, looking absolutely radiant in the $8,000 dress I'd worked overtime for months to afford. When she saw me, her face lit up with joy. "Dad, you look so handsome," she exclaimed, adjusting my tie. "Mom would be so proud of both of us today." The mention of Martha hit me like a punch to the gut. I had to clear my throat before I could speak. "You look beautiful, sweetheart, just like your mother on our wedding day." Amelia's eyes filled with tears, but happy ones. "I'm so nervous, Dad. But good nervous, you know. I can't believe this day is finally here. Thank you for everything you've done to make this possible." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her perfume, trying to memorize the feeling of holding my daughter while she was still happy, still innocent, still believing in fairy tales. "Amelia," I started, then stopped. Part of me wanted to tell her everything right then, to spare her the public humiliation that was coming. But I knew she wouldn't believe me without proof, and by the time I could show her the evidence, Carl would have talked his way out of it. "What is it, Dad?" "I just want you to know that no matter what happens today, I love you more than anything in this world, and everything I've ever done has been to protect you and make you happy." She looked at me strangely, probably wondering why I sounded so serious. "I know that, Dad. You're the best father anyone could ask for." One of the bridesmaids interrupted to tell us the ceremony was about to begin. I kissed Amelia's forehead and walked back toward the main church, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the organ music. The church was packed. Every seat I'd paid to reserve was filled with guests admiring the decorations I'd sacrificed to buy. At the front, Carl stood waiting in his expensive tuxedo, looking confident and charming, completely unaware that his secrets were about to destroy him. I took my assigned seat in the front row, next to Carl's parents who had flown in from Boston. His father, the man who would be walking my daughter down the aisle in my place, gave me a condescending nod. "Beautiful ceremony," he said. "Carl certainly knows how to do things properly." I gritted my teeth and nodded back. If only he knew what his son had been doing while I paid for his proper ceremony. The music changed, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. The wedding party processed down the aisle I'd paid to decorate, past the flowers I'd worked extra jobs to afford, toward the altar where my daughter would promise her life to a man who was planning to throw that promise away. Then Amelia appeared at the back of the church, radiant and glowing, her arm linked with Carl's father instead of mine. The sight of another man escorting my daughter down the aisle I'd paid for, while I sat powerless in the audience, made my anger flare white-hot. She reached the altar and Carl took her hands, smiling that practiced smile he'd perfected for public consumption. The minister began speaking about love and commitment and lifelong promises, words that meant nothing to the man who'd been cheating on his bride-to-be with 3 different women. I looked at my watch. In exactly 10 minutes, Linda would send the signal. In 10 minutes, this farce would be over, and Carl's carefully constructed lies would crumble. The minister was asking if anyone had any reason why Carl and Amelia shouldn't be married when my phone vibrated with Linda's text, "Ready when you are, ready when you..." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady but my resolve rock solid. The entire church turned to look at me, including Amelia and Carl. My daughter's face showed confusion, but Carl's showed something else, the first flicker of fear. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church, "there's something everyone needs to know before this ceremony continues." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Amelia's face went pale. Carl's jaw tightened, and I saw him calculating, trying to figure out how to control the situation. "Walter," he said, trying to sound calm and reasonable, "maybe we should discuss this privately." I shook my head, walking slowly toward the center aisle so everyone could see me clearly. "No, Carl, this is exactly where it needs to be discussed. In front of everyone who came here believing they were witnessing the beginning of a real marriage." The church fell completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of everyone's attention. "Before my daughter promises her life to you," I continued, looking directly at Carl, "I think she deserves to meet 3 women who know you very well, 3 women you've been seeing while she planned your wedding." Carl's face went white. "That's ridiculous. You're obviously having some kind of breakdown." But his voice cracked slightly, and I saw panic beginning to replace his composure. I pulled out my phone and sent Linda the signal. Through the church windows, I could see 3 figures walking across the parking lot toward the front entrance. "That's funny, Carl," I said, my voice getting stronger with every word, "because these 3 women have some very interesting things to say about your relationship with them, and some very interesting evidence to back it up." The church doors opened, and Jessica, Rachel, and Sarah walked in together, their faces grim but determined. The collective gasp from the wedding guests was audible. Carl looked like he was about to be sick. "Who are these people?" Amelia whispered, but her voice carried in the silence. I turned to face my daughter, my heart breaking for what I was about to put her through, but knowing it was the only way to save her. "These are the women your fiancé has been betraying you with, sweetheart, and they're here to tell you the truth about the man you were about to marry." The silence in the church was deafening. 300 guests sat frozen in their seats, watching as Jessica, Rachel, and Sarah walked slowly down the aisle I'd paid to decorate. Their footsteps echoed off the marble floors like a funeral march. Amelia stood at the altar in her $8,000 dress, her bouquet trembling in her hands, looking back and forth between the approaching women and Carl with growing horror in her eyes. "Carl," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "what's going on? Who are these women?" Carl's face had gone from white to gray. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning I'd paid extra to ensure worked perfectly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. "This is insane," he finally managed. "Walter's lost his mind. I don't know who these people are." But his voice was shaking, and everyone in the church could hear the lie in it. Jessica reached the front first. She was wearing a simple black dress, her blonde hair pulled back severely, her makeup smudged from crying in the car. She looked at Carl with pure disgust, then turned to face Amelia. "I'm Jessica Morrison," she said, her voice clear and steady, "and I've been sleeping with your fiancé twice a week for the past 4 months. A collective gasp rippled through the church. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. In the front row, Carl's mother clutched her pearls and whispered, "Oh my God." Amelia staggered backward, her bouquet falling from her hands and scattering white roses across the altar. "That's not true. That can't be true." Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. He told me he was going to call off the wedding, that you two weren't really in love anymore, that your father was pressuring him to go through with it, but after today, he'd be free. She scrolled through her messages, then held up the phone so everyone could see the screen. Here's a text from last Tuesday. Can't wait for this wedding circus to be over so we can start our real life together. Carl lunged toward Jessica, trying to grab the phone. That's fake. She's making this up. But Rachel stepped forward, blocking his path. The young brunette looked heartbroken but determined. I'm Rachel Santos, she announced, and Carl told me he was single. We've been dating for 6 months. He said he loved me and wanted to move in together after his business situation was resolved. She pulled out a small jewelry box from her purse. He gave me this promise ring 3 weeks ago, said it was a symbol of our commitment to each other. Amelia made a sound like a wounded animal. She was shaking so hard I was afraid she might collapse. Show them the photos, I called out, my voice cutting through the chaos. Rachel nodded and pulled out printed photographs. Pictures of her and Carl holding hands in restaurants, kissing in parking lots, looking like a happy couple in love. She held them up for everyone to see. He took me to Romano's last month, Rachel said, her voice breaking slightly. Said it was our 6-month anniversary. He ordered champagne and told me I was the most important person in his life. That's when Sarah stepped forward. The red-haired bank employee looked sick to her stomach, but she squared her shoulders and faced the crowd. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I work at First National Bank. I'm the one who processed Mr. Henderson's loan application for this wedding. She looked directly at me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Walter. I had no idea. She turned to address the entire church. Carl and I have been involved for 8 months. He told me his engagement was a business arrangement, that there was no love between him and Amelia. He said after the wedding, he'd get divorced and we'd get married. Sarah pulled out a folder thick with documents. He's already consulted with a divorce attorney. He was planning to file for dissolution of marriage 6 months after today, claiming irreconcilable differences. The church erupted in shocked murmurs and angry voices. Carl's father stood up, his face purple with rage. Carl, what the hell is this? But Carl wasn't listening to his father. He was staring at me with pure hatred, finally understanding that I'd orchestrated this entire revelation. You bastard, he snarled, taking a step toward me. You set this up. You planned this whole thing. Yes, I did, I replied calmly. Because someone had to protect my daughter from a lying, cheating fraud who was planning to steal her life and throw it away. That's when Carl completely lost control. You have no idea what you've done. Do you know how much money I could have made from this marriage? How many connections? How many opportunities? The words hung in the air like poison gas. Even his own parents recoiled in horror at what their son had just admitted. Amelia let out a sob that came from somewhere deep in her soul. Money? You were marrying me for money? Carl realized too late what he'd revealed. No, baby, that's not what I meant. I love you. You know I love you. But Amelia was backing away from him, shaking her head violently. You don't love me. You never loved me. This whole thing, our whole relationship, it was all fake. Jessica stepped closer to Amelia, her voice gentle now. He told me you were cold, that you didn't understand him. He said your father was controlling and manipulative, that he felt trapped. He told me you were just friends, Rachel added quietly, that you were helping him maintain appearances for his family's business connections. Sarah nodded. He said the engagement was his parents' idea, that he was going along with it until he could figure out how to get out of it without causing a scandal. Each revelation hit Amelia like a physical blow. I watched my daughter's world crumble piece by piece, watched her realize that everything she'd believed about her relationship was a lie. The minister, who had been standing frozen throughout this entire scene, finally found his voice. I think we should postpone this ceremony. There isn't going to be a ceremony, Amelia said, her voice hollow and broken. She started pulling at her engagement ring with shaking fingers. There isn't going to be a marriage. Carl made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Amelia, please, let me explain. These women are lying. They're trying to break us up because they're jealous. But Amelia wasn't listening. She finally got the ring off and threw it at his feet with such force that it bounced off the marble floor and rolled under a pew. Get away from me, she whispered. Get away from me and never come back. That's when Carl's composure finally shattered completely. His face contorted with rage as he turned on me. This is all your fault, he screamed. You couldn't just let her be happy. You had to destroy everything. He took a step toward me, His hands clenched into fists, but he never made it. The stress, the humiliation, the complete collapse of his carefully constructed lies hit him all at once. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor in a dead faint, his expensive tuxedo crumpling around him like a discarded costume. The church erupted in chaos. People were standing, talking, crying, taking pictures with their phones. Carl's parents rushed to help their unconscious son, while his groomsmen stood around looking shocked and useless. Through it all, Amelia stood perfectly still at the altar, staring down at Carl's motionless form with an expression I'd never seen before. Not sadness, not anger, but something colder. Recognition, maybe. Understanding of how completely she'd been fooled. I walked slowly toward my daughter, past the scattered rose petals and the abandoned wedding programs, past the evidence of every sacrifice I'd made to create this day that had turned into a nightmare. When I reached her, she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she whispered, "how long have you known?" 3 weeks, I said quietly. I hired a private investigator to find out for sure. She nodded slowly, like she was processing information she'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. "You spent all that money on the investigation, money you didn't have." "Yes." "And you planned this whole confrontation. You arranged for these women to be here." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the chaos surrounding us, at the wedding that had cost me everything and meant nothing. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for saving me." And then she collapsed into my arms, sobbing against my chest while the church emptied around us and Carl's unconscious form was carried out by paramedics who had been called by someone in the crowd. I held my daughter tightly, stroking her hair the way I had when she was little and had nightmares, whispering that everything would be okay. The wedding was over. The money was gone. But for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I was sitting on the front porch of Martha's mother's house, watching Amelia paint the shutters a soft blue color that reminded me of spring mornings. The house had been sitting empty since Grandma Rose passed 2 years ago, and Amelia had suggested we fix it up together. "What do you think, Dad?" she called out, stepping back to admire her work. "Too bright?" "It's perfect, sweetheart," I said, meaning it. Everything about this moment was perfect. The morning sunshine, the sound of birds in the oak tree Martha's father had planted 30 years ago, my daughter's laughter as she got more paint on herself than on the shutters. We'd been living here together for 4 months now, splitting the mortgage on my hardware store salary and her income from the art therapy job she'd started in March. It wasn't much money, but it was enough. More than enough, actually. For the first time in years, I wasn't lying awake at night worried about bills or sacrificing meals to save pennies. The house was small. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that needed updating, and a living room with hardwood floors that creaked when you walked across them. But it felt like home in a way that my old place never had. Maybe because Martha had spent summers here as a child, or maybe because Amelia and I were building something new here, something that belonged to just us. "Remember when Mom used to bring me here for Grandma's Sunday dinners?" Amelia asked, settling down on the porch steps beside me. She had paint in her hair and a smudge of blue on her cheek, and she looked happier than I'd seen her in years. "You were maybe 6 years old," I said, smiling at the memory. "You used to help Grandma Rose make her famous apple pie, but you'd eat more apples than went into the filling." Amelia laughed. "And you and Grandpa would sit right here on this porch talking about baseball and complaining about the weather." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood wake up around us. Mrs. Patterson from next door was working in her garden. The Rodriguez kids were riding bikes in the street. Normal, peaceful, everyday life happening at its own gentle pace. My phone buzzed with a text message, breaking the quiet. It was from Linda, the private investigator who'd helped me expose Carl's lies. "Thought you should know. Carl left town last month. Moved to Phoenix. Word is he's engaged again." I showed the message to Amelia. She read it without expression, then handed my phone back. "I feel sorry for her, whoever she is," Amelia said quietly. "But mostly, I feel grateful that's not me anymore." I studied my daughter's face, looking for any sign that Carl's name still had the power to hurt her, but all I saw was peace. She'd been going to therapy twice a week since March, working through what she called her trust issues, and what I called learning to spot liars and users before they could do damage. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. The way everything happened, I mean. The public scene, the humiliation. Amelia was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Sometimes I think about how embarrassed I was, walking out of that church with everyone staring. But then I remember what would have happened if you hadn't stopped it. She picked at a chip of paint on the porch railing. I would have married him. We would have gone on that honeymoon to Hawaii that you paid for. I would have believed everything was perfect for maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Then he would have divorced me, taken half of everything, and left me broken and cynical. She looked at me with those clear brown eyes that reminded me so much of Martha. Instead, I learned the truth when I was still strong enough to handle it, when I still had my dad to catch me when I fell. A car pulled into our driveway, a sensible silver Honda that belonged to Tom Rodriguez, our neighbor's older brother who'd been coming around more and more often lately. He worked as a paramedic and had the kind of steady, honest nature that I appreciated. More importantly, he made Amelia smile. "Hope I'm not interrupting," Tom said, getting out of his car with a bag of groceries in his arms. "I was at the store and remembered you mentioned wanting to try that new recipe." "You're not interrupting," Amelia said, her face lighting up in a way that was completely natural, completely unguarded. "Dad and I were just taking a break from painting." I watched them together, the easy way they talked, the way Tom automatically handed her a bottle of water from his grocery bag, the way she unconsciously leaned toward him when he sat down on the steps beside her. There was nothing calculated about it, nothing performed or manipulated, just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "How's the house coming along?" Tom asked, looking around at our renovation project. "Slowly but surely," I replied. "Amelia's got grand plans for every room, but we're taking our time with it." "That's the best way," Tom agreed. "Build something that lasts." Later that evening, after Tom had helped us move some furniture and shared dinner with us, I was washing dishes in the kitchen when Amelia came up beside me with a dish towel. "He's nice, Dad," she said quietly, starting to dry the plates I handed her. "Yes, he is. Different from Carl. Completely different." I nodded, understanding what she was really saying. Tom didn't charm or impress or overwhelm. He simply showed up, consistently and genuinely, without any agenda beyond spending time with someone he cared about. "Take your time, sweetheart," I said. "There's no rush for anything." "I know. That's what I like about him. He's not pushing for anything, not trying to convince me of anything. He just is." We finished the dishes in comfortable silence, then moved to the living room where Tom was reading one of Martha's old books from the shelf we'd rescued from storage. "I should head home," he said, setting the book down carefully. "Early shift tomorrow." After he left, Amelia and I sat on the couch watching an old movie on the small television we'd bought at a yard sale. It wasn't fancy, but it worked, and that seemed to be our motto for everything these days. Simple, functional, real. "Dad," Amelia said during a commercial break, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "The money you spent on the wedding. All those loans and overtime hours and sacrifices. Do you ever regret it?" I considered the question carefully. The truth was, I was still paying off those loans. My retirement fund was gone, my savings were depleted, and I was working more hours than a 58-year-old man should have to work. By any financial measure, Carl's betrayal had cost me dearly. "No," I said finally, "I don't regret it." "But it was so much money, Dad. Years of savings, your retirement." "Money comes and goes," I said, meaning it. "But you only get one chance to protect your child when they really need you. One chance to stand up and fight for what's right." I looked around our small living room, at the second-hand furniture and discount store decorations, at the life we were building together on a much smaller budget, but with much greater peace. "Besides," I added, "look what we got instead. This house, this life, this chance to start over. You happy and healthy and learning to trust again. Me getting to be your dad instead of just your financier." Amelia leaned against my shoulder the way she used to when she was little. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was important. You were in love, or you thought you were. There's nothing to be sorry for." As we watched the rest of the movie, I thought about that day at the church 6 months ago. The chaos, the tears, the dramatic collapse of everything I'd worked so hard to create. It had felt like the end of the world at the time. But sitting here now, in this quiet house with my daughter safe beside me, I realized it hadn't been an ending at all. It had been a beginning. The beginning of a smaller, simpler, more honest life. The beginning of a relationship with Amelia based on truth instead of transactions. The beginning of understanding that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to find everything you actually need. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening quiet. Mrs. Patterson turned off her porch light. The Rodriguez kids called their bicycles inside for the night. Tom's house across the street glowed with warm yellow light from his kitchen window. Tomorrow, Amelia and I would finish painting the shutters. This weekend, we'd plant the small garden she'd been planning. Next month, we'd start renovating the bathroom with materials I could actually afford. Small projects, small dreams, small victories, but they were ours, built on truth and paid for with honest work and genuine love. Carl could keep his schemes and his lies and his grand plans that crumbled at the first touch of reality. This quiet, simple happiness was worth more than all the money I'd lost and all the dreams I'd given up. It was worth everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. Until here.